Have you always felt different? One of my therapists asked me that, looking me straight in the eye. And honestly, I don't think anyone has ever really asked me that, or at least no, a professional. And without missing a beat, I said always. And it was like feeling this immense heaviness lifted off my shoulders. So, navigating life as someone with ADHD sometimes feels like tiptoeing through a minefield. My thoughts race, my emotions are intense, and my interactions often feel like carefully calculated moves to avoid unnecessary criticism. And before I was finally diagnosed with ADHD in my late 30s, I always felt different. Not necessarily in a bad way, but in a very disconnected way that led to a very deep sense of covert loneliness. So growing up, I had really big dreams, really big visions of being, this mom who's like juggling the work deadlines with bake sales and soccer practice pickups. My spouse would rely on my unwavering support, and my friends would confide in me, and everyone seemed to operate under this assumption that I had it all figured out. But the reality of it now is that that was all an illusion. And it was a very detailed and meticulously curated fantasy. A great fantasy, but a fantasy nonetheless. And my people pleasing would become one of the superpowers. It's not a superpower, but a necessary survival strategy that I would hone to near perfection. So my childhood memories were this jumbled mess of gifted kid, which I don't think I was ever classified as one, but I had tendencies and I never quite fit in, and I had constant undercurrent of loneliness that I just couldn't quite explain. So social interactions felt again, like a minefield, and every word even was a calculated move to avoid setting off the dreaded too sensitive bomb. And there was this constant pressure to always be perfect and for everything, to be everything to everyone. And it just left me feeling utterly invisible and like I was a ghost haunting my own life. And before my diagnosis, I didn't even think of myself as a victim. I'm not a victim. I was just different, And so simple everyday tasks, so ones that everyone around me completed, it seemed like effortlessly, they felt arduous and unmanageable. And getting from the house to even the corner, let alone the bus stop without forgetting my keys or putting away laundry, could sometimes I have learned, at least since then, that immediately after coming out of the dryer, that's when the laundry goes upstairs to get folded and then put away, because otherwise I'm going to forget about it until later. And, by the end of it, when my thought, let's talk about that, because inside my head, it was like a scribble. It still kind of is like a scribble, if you can't tell. So if you remember those black and white ones, like drawings that you draw as a kid and then fill in with all different colors, when my thoughts aren't managed, they get jumbled like overlapping scribbles. And by the end of the day, I'm left with this big, messy mash of ideas. Medication usually helps with minimizing things, or at least helping to keep them together, as though I can at least focus and complete some projects. And when that happens, I become a clear, bright rainbow with a tiny bit of gold at the end. So as one of those very late, or not very late, but one of those late diagnosed ADHD adults, let's look back. I want to look back at some of those classic, but I guess we'd call them invisible signs. First, we'll look at the anxiety. By the time an individual with ADHD turns 12, they have received 20,000 or negative messages from someone without the condition. And for me, this triggered a lot of anxiety coupled with bouts of low mood that became more prevalent as I moved from childhood to adolescence and young adulthood. So I struggled to find the relief, but no solution did more than scratch the surface because my ADHD remained undiagnosed. Number two, the self-resentment. All of the criticism, both internal and external, and let me tell you, that internal critic is harsh. That internal critic is a bit of a bitch. And that filled my teenage years with extra torture and torment. Teenage years are hard enough to begin with, but having the added undiagnosed ADHD it was a mess. And as I struggled to understand myself, self-resentment grew and somehow found a way to fester despite all the noise. So trying to keep up with conversations that were going on in my head but thinking of nothing, no matter how hard I tried, it was beyond exhausting and infuriating. Number three is the disorganization. So poor organization has been pretty consistent throughout my life, but no one could really connect the dots. It was just like the clever but unorganized and capable to finish work. Interactions with children my age were challenging, and sometimes I get really angry or just really frustrated or just very overwhelmed with them. And I was most comfortable around my parents and other trusted adults and preferred their company. Number four is the unfinished projects. So despite my many difficulties, I was driven to achieve big things. And ADHD minds often see a very clear beginning and an end, but the middle part, which is the place where the invisible hurdles lurk, that's always muddy. So the more I tried to reach my goals, the harder they became to attain. And it was just like having a combination padlock inside my brain. And I can tell you, there are so many things that I've started with the best of intent, and I could clearly envision the end of it. But then it was working through the middle of it. It's just like, I'm done. And which leads to number five, which is the unattainable goals. So another ADHD tendency is believing that the best way forward is to set bigger goals without achieving the smaller ones first. And let me tell you, I'm so guilty of that. So time and time again, I would become fixated on these big, gigantic goals, only to lose interest or fail to achieve it because I couldn't successfully map out a plan. I've learned how to overcome that, or at least to make things more manageable and far more realistic. Number six is low self-confidence, which goes in with the low self-esteem. And we'll get into that in a couple other videos, but that will just stick with me here for the right now. So I had this continuous cycle of self-sabotage, self-fulfilling prophecies. And it just continued to set very unrealistically high expectations. Truth be told, I still do. I set very high expectations for myself with certain things. And then I would get performance anxiety or achievement anxiety. And that would just undermine my confidence even more and perpetuating this cycle of self-destructive patterns that took a toll on my mental health. And number seven, emotional dysregulation. This with the executive dysfunctioning stuff. Those have always been the biggest 1-2 punch. And emotional dysregulation was one of my biggest struggles. It still is, quite honestly. So my levels triggered anger and fear and sadness, confusedly juxtaposed with my happy-and-go-lucky side. So if I upset with someone too close to me, sometimes I couldn't understand why, or I would understand all too well, and then I feel super guilty about it. And, having this kind of like hypersensitivity, hyper-emotional awareness about you as a teenager or just as a child in general, it can wreak havoc because you, again, as that too sensitive child, which I carried that label with me. And I always thought, it was a bad thing until I realized later on, not such a bad thing. It was just perceived as a bad thing. My story, though, which is just one of many of late diagnosed ADHD women, has a happy ending. And without realizing it, before looking back on all these things, I did a lot of good things to kind of manage my symptoms and signs pre-diagnosis. I had a relatively healthy diet. Right? I will get into this in another video um, about body dysmorphia. And, I got into yoga and Pilates and some other forms of regular exercise. And this regime really helped get me some moments of clarity. And later on, though, it was just the combination of getting that actual diagnosis and being on the right medication that has made the world of difference for me. And I get it, medication's not for everybody, but it's helped me a ton. So I have in my life earned my associate's degree. I had a 3.97 GPA and I got accepted into Phi Theta Kappa, which is honor society for 2-year colleges. I received full or partial scholarships to every college that I applied to when I was considering my bachelor's degree. Ultimately, though, I pursued coaching and training and maybe a doctorate degree is in my future. Maybe the master's degree is in my future. We'll see how it all plays out. Overcoming the obstacles, though, in my life, especially with my mental health and then with these other, additional challenges, those have been some of the true and real accomplishments in my lifetime. So navigating life as a neurodivergent individual can be isolating and it can be challenging. But understanding and managing the signs, the symptoms, whatever else of ADHD has brought a lot of clarity and empowerment to my life. I'm sharing these struggles with you and these triumphs too, because I think it's crucial to creating a space of understanding and connection. So if you see yourself reflected in these experiences, let me know in the comment below. And also know you are not alone, and it's never too late to seek answers and support.